All right.
Did they return?
Try that. Well, they are, but let's see what happens when I do the screen share. Okay. Yeah, they're still here. And they're no longer hiding. So it's bizarre. Okay. So when I'm doing this, one thing that I find helpful is to just kind of step back and because you can't be thinking about it as far as the claims are and everything like that. It's more like what would a reasonable person say if they were logical, you know. It's not quite the average person because the average person wouldn't even notice they're overlapping. But it's kind of like you take a step back, blur your eyes, and say, okay, what are we really trying to ask here?
Mhm.
Um, and that's more of a heuristic. But one thing that makes me think is that really, um, the main question that I think we're going to end up trying to answer does is LDL or ApoB maybe would be an even more specific thing actually causal in heart disease? Um, but that may not be the right place to start. Um,
Yeah, you would probably get there right from the keto diet does not increase my risk of heart disease or whatever your top question slash claim is.
yeah,
And it would somehow get to ApoB. It does X to ApoB, and ApoB is related to heart disease. Is that
yeah. Well, ApoB is correlated with heart disease, and they assume it's causal, but I don't think there's any evidence, which we'll have to check.
okay?
Um,
I add that as a question right now, just so.
so like keto diet lowers all these other markers, but so do other diets, which is something we need to be able to fit in there. So I would think we could probably group all of these into, well, let's look at them real quick. So and make sure they don't really overlap. Cuz like blood sugar and insulin are really the same thing. I don't so there's in some of these things we may combine into a single unit and then we may get a piece of evidence that makes us break them apart. Um but I think it's better to go ahead and combine them um until you have some evidence that needs to break them apart, because really insulin, I mean, your body is reacting to carbs by raising insulin to fight the blood sugar, so they're all they're part of the same metabolic flow. It's just expressed at different times in different ways. So I think those two are definitely sufficient enough to be included. um Although what's interesting is that other diets will let you have weight loss, but won't affect the metabolism issues. And so probably the triglycerides, the insulin, and the blood sugar probably could all be combined under, I don't know, maybe healthy metabolism. Of course, the problem is people define healthy differently.
Under metabolism that does not contribute to heart disease?
Yeah. Or you could even just put them all in one and list them out, blood sugar, insulin, and triglycerides. Um, so we
See,
don't have to come up with another word.
the thing I'm wondering is in terms of the scoring, like is it going to really matter? I imagine it does. That's where my assumption is. And
Well, it'll mean that these three items, rather than Having the weight of 3 claims will be the weight of 1 claim,
Yeah,
but that's
and
what we
then,
want it to be.
right, but then I don't understand, then would we also include increases HDL? Would that, what is the distinguishing factor between HDL and those four?
Um, well, HDL would be different, but I would probably combine the HDL and the LDL. Once again, the main thing is that are you going to have evidence that applies to one but not the other?
Okay,
So there are diets that don't shift the HDL and the LDL, and there are diets that don't shift the metabolism thing, but those diets do contribute to weight loss. So the whole weight loss thing will probably be countered by things saying, oh, there are other diets that don't increase your LDL, um, or from small to, that don't increase these other risk factors, but also have the weight loss. So keto in that case doesn't have a benefit over the other diets, because really what the statement is, um, or one of the ways to look at the statement, and maybe of the main claim, is that there are the other ways of not dying from heart disease are equal.
does that matter if our question is specifically, or our claim is specifically the keto diet does not increase the risk of heart disease? Do I care that the Mediterranean diet is equally effective? Like, is that even part of the?
Well, it depends on, okay, so the depends on what question you really want to answer. But the point is that if we I guess what I'm saying is that we may have to reframe the main question, because answering a claim that people can then dismiss immediately isn't of much value. So if we say, hey, heart disease doesn't, keto diet, um, let me think through that because it was going a different direction. Uh, it depends on how you define increase the risk of heart disease.
Yeah, I just got that as well.
Yeah.
Because in the increase the risk of heart disease compared to what?
Yeah. Right. So compared to doing nothing, it does. But if they're like, oh, but I know this diet that you get all the exact same benefits, but you don't get this, and they just dismiss it, then we haven't answered the the core question.
Yeah, and like if they are already on that diet, then the claim the keto diet does not increase the risk of heart disease. Yeah, you're right. Like it's technically true because it doesn't do anything in terms of the
Yeah,
risk of heart disease because they're on an equivalent diet.
because yeah, the bigger question is, should Bentley change his diet?
Yeah. Okay. And now, if for you specifically, what diet are you on, or can you call it something? Is there a label for whatever
I mean,
diet currently
it's
on?
pretty traditional keto. It's almost keto carnivore, but not quite. Um,
So if we pick one to say like the standard American diet suggested by the health whatever,
no, those are two different things. So the standard American diet is the way people are eating. The
right?
and
Sorry,
then
the suggested American diet is I think
yeah,
what I meant to say, suggested by the health authorities, whatever
yeah.
that is.
Um,
I have a claim in the TL draw that says, yeah, it's that second one on opposes, selecting a diet consistent with the UK dietary guidelines. I would just replace that with the US,
hmm,
say that's what we're comparing
yeah.
keto to. Okay.
Um, yeah, that might be a way to go. See, and if we do that, then making the claim that keto diets are effective weight loss doesn't work in that context, because in theory, if you're following the recommended diet, you would have weight loss.
But would you have greater weight loss on keto?
Well,
My intuition is to claim that is yes.
the speed of weight loss was faster, but the end of the weight loss is not. In theory, if you're following the standard diet in this, after a couple of years, you'd be the same weight in both diets.
Interesting.
I mean, that's what they would say. I would think you'd be healthier on the keto diet, but we'd have to prove that point.
But for other reasons, because there is a. I imagine
you
there's
don't
a
end up having
bottom.
to cut. Yeah, you don't end up having to cut your toes off in 30 years because you have type 2 diabetes, which is exactly what the standard diet gives you for the majority of people, like over half the people.
Oh wait, so now I'm misunderstanding the standard diet, not the U.S. dietary guidelines.
The U.S. recommended guideline diet gives you diabetes.
Really? Okay,
That's my claim.
that's your claim. We might have to put that in there.
We may not. Well, so I don't. I don't know if we want to go down that rigmarole.
Yeah.
But there's no way they can recommend the amount of carbs that they recommend, even if you're talking about slow carbs. And if you eat that strictly for, 30, 40 years, that you wouldn't get diabetes, type 1, type 2 diabetes, at least pre-diabetic. For a majority of the people.
I just have this idea of what the U.S. dietary guidelines are. I don't actually know.
Yeah.
And I think there's a picture in the first source I went through.
So yeah, I think they have something. They have the plate.
Yeah,
they used to have the triangle, but they changed it to a plate. Dietaryguidelines.gov. That's weird.
Yeah, we have it here, but it doesn't have any numbers. It's just a picture. Oh, it's Canada's. That's what I didn't realize.
Oh, the one you were looking at?
Yeah.
Although most countries do pretty closely follow the US's guidelines. They make a change. I don't know about Canada for sure, but
This picture is not very informative. It just has half the plate is vegetables, a quarter is protein, and a quarter is whole grains. And it just says, have plenty of fruits and vegetables. Eat protein foods. Choose whole grain foods. And that's it.
yeah, it may not even be specific enough to do a comparison. Because I could make a diet.
But going back to kind of like the main thing we're looking at, or stated we're looking at in this meeting, was clarifying the claims. And it seems to be the case that we need to, that first claim, make give some context or give a clarification of what we're comparing it to. The keto diet does not increase the risk of heart disease compared to what? Does that seem?
Yeah, I think
correct?
that's probably a good way to go. And I think comparing it to the US dietary guidelines is probably the way to go.
Yeah, that sounds right to me.
And so that kicks out a lot of the fluff, because the keto people do often talk about how you lose weight and all these markers go down, and the people on the other side are like, not if you're eating the proper diet. Um, and there's a whole bunch of diets that would have that same effect. Now the question is, do we need to still have these claims? Or is it obvious to people viewing it that, I mean, I guess it's not obvious because I'm one that says that you'd have diabetes in 30 years, and we may. I don't know if you could substantiate that because they don't actually know how many years of increased insulin.
Yeah.
Like,
It would be
this,
interesting to see the studies that people who made these claims off of these blood sugar, insulin, etc., what they said about the test group in terms of their previous diet.
well,
Okay.
yeah, I mean, if you're talking about diabetes, it's mostly observational studies. So you're looking at comparing countries and states and cities and their consumptions and how many people have diabetes and how many people don't. Of course, the
I guess,
problem is that you're pre-diabetic for 10 years before your insulin levels are rising, and then you don't show up on any statistics until your pancreas starts giving out, and then your blood sugar's too high. But they're not tracking no one's tracking that previous 10 years. I mean, they're starting to kind of track pre-diabetics, but
and
even
kind of,
pre-diabetics, they're talking about your blood sugar being too high. It's just not at a high level that you need insulin yet. So pre-diabetes is still not as soon as you could identify it. You can still identify it 10 years before because your insulin's high. And that's your body compensating because you're getting too many carbs. And then they think, so the medical community tends to these days say that you're getting the higher insulin because your fat cells are full. So it's mostly for overweight people. But there's tons and tons of underweight people that are still pre-diabetic and diabetic, or not underweight, but average weight, healthy weight, that model doesn't take into account. When really I mean, in the ketogenic diet group is basically saying that because you're eating so frequently and you're having carbs at every meal, your insulin never drops down. So your body can't consume the fat molecules, which still tends to make you overweight. But basically your fat cells get desensitized to the insulin because they're always swimming in it. So even if they're not oversized, that's the claim. Now, what evidence there is for that, I don't know.
yeah.
But yeah, you did a good job earlier dragging me back to, okay, what's the main claim? So,
But even
yeah.
now, going down that road and thinking about that actually makes me wonder what that. Are we going to shoot ourselves in the foot by saying, okay, the keto diet does not increase the risk of heart disease compared to the US dietary guideline diet? Well, are there, kind of going to the question of what was the cohort they were comparing in whatever test they did to make the claim keto diet lowers your blood sugar. And let me be more clear.
Whether we can't,
Are we
yeah,
going to
we
have
can't find the
evidence?
data.
Yeah, are we going to be able to have evidence that supports that claim, like
Well,
in journals?
I think you can. I think oftentimes when you're trying to make decisions like this, you can't find a study that exactly measures what you want. But the combination of studies saying that people on the
Recommended.
you could find studies showing that, or I think we need to dig into it. But observational studies showing that people, and if they're given a questionnaire on how they're eating, they claim to be following the government guidelines or better, and they still have pre-diabetes. A certain percentage of them still.
I imagine that'd be the best we get.
Yeah.
In terms of that.
Of course, you don't have the alternate studies showing that all these people on keto are non-diabetic. Although, if you show that keto reduces triglycerides and reduces, I mean, that's a good question. So, what's the standard? I mean, I guess it doesn't matter where the evidence is, because even if we come to the conclusion that there aren't studies, or there's no way to get at this question, then people still need to shut up and sit down, because there's not evidence. You know what I'm saying? The important thing is to ask the right question regardless of whether there's evidence for it or against it. Because the problem that we have right now is that people are arguing on both sides as if it's a settled issue, and
Right.
just pointing out that there's not enough evidence on either side, and it's like right in the middle. That's sufficient to get people focused on, okay, let's get together and design some studies or some ways to observe things to answer the actual questions, rather than futzing around on the edges of the debate and scoring useless points against each other.
And I imagine a scenario in which, like, this is my ideal scenario. If we had the canonical debate, for example, of this topic, you could watch a YouTube video, watch a debate, and read an article, pull out, okay, well, they're making this claim as if it's already decided, like you said. But then you could like fit that claim within that subset of the canonical debate, saying, well, you say this, but actually this study. So
yeah, and what I'm suggesting won't actually get to that, but I guess what I'm saying is more of a priority order. When we get the canonical debate, it'll be a corpus of a whole bunch of claims. And there's a certain size that it has to be before it becomes useful as that. But the ones that are more important for us to start on, when we can only do a few, are these ones that are the real claims that people are arguing, rather than the claims that people are winning.
Right. Sense. I think so.
But yeah, but in the future, we'll be able to hit all these claims that are on the edge, that people are throwing at each other.
But even in the now, I guess maybe what I'm wondering is, instead of picking a top claim and having a hierarchical tree, what if we actually just go the route as if it was the canonical debate, but just in this arena, and we create more of a knowledge graph rather than a flowchart? Maybe, I guess the risks of doing that would be you don't end up with a clear video that has a timeline start to finish.
Well, the greater risk is, what is the value of something like that?
So that when someone comes up with a claim and they're assuming that the debate is solved, you can be like, well, no, look, I have this. I'm holding a knowledge graph orb in my hand right now. Like, I have this, and let's take a look at what you're saying.
Right, but then they go to the next one, and then you're at this chicken and egg. You're at this arms race.
What do you mean the next one?
Well, then they go to another claim. The point is that they're arguing over the wrong thing. So we can help them better argue on the wrong thing, or we can give them a path that leads them to arguing about the right thing. So someone in keto arguing that it helps you lose weight compared to the standard American diet where Americans eat too many Twinkies, that's a wasted argument. So me disproving that, I would rather say that doesn't matter, because we're we're looking at someone who's choosing between the government suggested one
Right.
and this one. That's the important one. There are other ways to do that.
I agree with you there.
Hmm.
I'm wondering how that relates back to what we're doing here and the video. I'm having a hard time making that connection because I feel like it'd be easy to just do that, to say like, well, no, that actually doesn't matter for X. Now here, look at this. But I guess the
Well, we
question is,
will
well,
say, I
what?
mean, we will probably end up saying that in here in some way. I don't know. We might have to go into that. Well, I guess not, if we might still need to have that one. But like if you could only solve if you could only disprove 10 claims, I think it's a more useful use of finite resources to choose the good arguments to debunk rather than the straw man arguments to debunk.
Yeah, I agree with you there. So where do we get those 10 claims? Are we making them, or are we just finding them based on what we
I
see
mean, I think we have to make them because the people argue so badly that you can't find them.
Yeah.
No one is, no one's out there saying the keto diet is better than the
The Mediterranean.
the government suggested diet, because the keto group is comparing it to what people eat today, and the other side is comparing it to the government suggested diet. So they're talking past each other.
Yeah.
And so rather than arguing with both, we'll say, okay, here's the better argument. And then when everyone, I think, yeah, I guess,
And
or that's where I'd
what
like to focus. So
what
we
is
take
that
whatever
better
claims
argument?
are doing and we make them as strong as possible.
Yeah.
And so the strongest claim in this case would be keto diet does not increase the risk of heart disease over, again, over the U.S. dietary guidelines. What's the official name? Might as well write that down somewhere. I mean, we could just say the dietary guidelines for Americans,
I have an article here that's
which is a shame
20.
because Canada is in America. Language
I,
sucks.
it's especially English.
Yeah.
I always watch these videos that they take English words and put them side by side, and they're talking to a pretend foreign person, like, how do you pronounce this? How do you pronounce it? It's hilarious when you intuitively, it just doesn't make sense, these words put together too. I found an article here that says the dietary guidelines for Americans 2010 update. Imagine maybe there's a 2020 update.
Yeah, they should have had a more recent one. They did. Here's the 2025 Dietary Guidelines Advisory Committee. So there should have been a 2020.
Dietary guidelines for Americans 2020 to 2025, written in 2021, 95 citations.
I guess the official name is Dietary Guidelines for Americans, and then I think in parentheses is like the version number, we'd say 2020 to 2025.
Yeah.
So yeah, so let's update the claim to do that, and that should.
Why?
I mean, that may eliminate a lot of our work, but
I think it would make it a bit more difficult to, because every study that shows up, like, well, this one doesn't count, this one does count, this one doesn't count, depending on the cohort that they're comparing to.
yeah, I think a lot of the studies though can still like if they did a diet that showed there's like this is in and then this is out, but there's a lot in the middle. It's like it informs the probability. So yeah, I can't think of an example of the dietary ones where it does that. It's like, you know, studies on rats
Yeah,
are useful.
yeah. But it's still worth noting if it was on rats or if it wasn't. I like to
Yeah,
actually,
it'd just be kind of weak evidence, but there will be
yeah,
some that can be used.
I liked how the lipid series that I just went through, how she wrote that. And she said she made sure she claimed it was rats or humans or in vitro or in vivo, I think is the other term. And the way she put it in there was really felt transparent.
Have you seen the NRATS Twitter account?
No, I haven't.
It when someone quotes a study and it's a study about rats, that account replies and says NRATS.
That's awesome. That's so good.
I think it's rats or in mice or something. No, that's rats in movies. That's not what I want. Someone mentioned it, so maybe impossible to find nowadays with how Twitter is. So let's head down the path of changing that top one to be the US dietary guidelines, the dietary guidelines for Americans 2020 to 2025.
I am on it. I'm importing it into Zotero now, so you
And
can reference it directly.
you might still need a place, and maybe that's what this is, where you put things that are kind of like maybe in, maybe out, or
Yeah.
because I have a feeling there's going to be a lot of things that we think are going to be excluded from here, but we haven't quite decided. So, like this one, losing weight, it still might be good to have somewhere, but it would just be immediately debunked. I guess we'd want to have that if people are still making that claim. But I'd almost want to leave the triglycerides and see if we can find anything to support the fact that even on that, the triglycerides and the insulin and that a long period of time, if you're on the suggested diet, I just, I'm wondering if there's any. The other thing is, I think we're moving beyond the point where we're like looking for what people claimed and then trying to fit those claims into this, because especially since we're getting pretty far off now, I think it's like we're going to have to be searching for evidence around these claims, because okay, so we take the claim, we rewrite it stronger, and then suddenly the evidence that used on both sides on that claim no longer makes sense. So now we need to see if there's any evidence. I mean, some of it might, but in other cases like this, it's like, let's see if we can find some studies that track. Of course, the other problem is that the 2020 to 2025 dietary guidelines have only been out for a couple of years. You can't have a longitudinal study for 30 years on it.
That's a good point.
Although they're not that different from the old ones, so we
Should
might
we just be
say,
generic?
huh?
Should we just be generic in terms of just say dietary guidelines for Americans without a specific year?
Yeah, although I think it was called something different back then.
I found up, like, when I did that quick search, it was dietary guidelines for Americans in 1990 and 2010, so I'm guessing 2000 as well.
Yeah. Yeah, maybe we'll need to expand it to just dietary guidelines, USA. Because maybe we could have a claim later on saying the guidelines have changed, but this is where it helps to have someone actually arguing on the other side of the argument, because no one has actually made this clear of a strong argument. I don't there we don't really know what the people on the other side of the argument would think, because no one's ever addressed it. And maybe that's also part of this. The first video is to say, this is the first half, or the first one in a series. Bring us your, and maybe it needs to be even a shorter one, and say, right now they're dead even. Bring us evidence on one side or the other. But since we've strengthened these arguments, I mean, hopefully people will actually argue against the claims we make as opposed to straw man of it. But I guess some people won't. But
Yeah, I think that's inevitable.
so I might have to do it. This is the one thing I keep forgetting when I kind of do this, is that we're changing the claims so much. But we can try first. Now for me, I would almost want to like rewrite this claim and put it someplace else and start a whole new tree and bring things over as I analyze them. That's the way I would do it.
Let's do it. There's
Oh.
you can do pages. So yeah, top left when it says keto there. I already have a backup. Apparently, I already did that once. Check that out. So if you go to the top left of your TL draw screen, you see keto.
Oh.
You can copy and paste into another one, and it looks like I've already done that. I don't remember why, but if you go to the backup page, there's another.
Yeah. I'm wondering if it's easier on one screen so you can just drag them off as you use them rather than toggling back and forth.
Sure. Yeah, we could definitely do that. So I could do maybe frame.
Yeah.
And should we keep that on? That's not part of it. I don't know, like or something.
Yep.
And then now you got another one. With the new change. That's the one
Well,
thing.
you're gonna take everything out, so you might just start with
Right.
a blank frame.
Yeah, I guess, right. So one thing I don't know a lot of Canvas apps do yet is have a very good timeline history. Whimsical actually does, but
Yeah.
they're not very well known. To be able to like press play and watch all the changes that you made, I actually think is a very valuable feature.
Yeah. And some apps, not so much these, they even have like a scrub slider so you can
Yeah,
scrub through the timeline.
that's perfect. Like that. One day we'll have that
Yeah.
for every app, but no.
So are there any claims that we could bring over immediately? I mean, almost the saturated fats increase, the negative ones still come over. Or the saturated fats ones probably still comes over.
Yeah.
Now I didn't think about it. Those are kind of in context. Do we want to leave them here but can we visually mark that we've already considered that one and moved in we
Do
kind
we
of need
wanna-
a way to
oh.
say, we've looked at this one.
Well, if we keep it there, that's one way, but that's not very efficient.
Yeah, it's just, I think we'll lose context if we just move it over, but I don't know, I could be wrong. What's the copy for these? Is it the alt?
Yes.
Yeah.
I grabbed it too by
It's like on
accident.
Miro. I'm not very good at this because I'm used to the Miro.
Yeah, they all have their own keyboard shortcuts, and TL draw, it doesn't do a good job of intuitively showing you that. You have to like just know it. And
Oh, that's interesting. So do the lines click onto things?
yeah, it's actually you put it's really interesting. It's different. You put it anywhere inside the box, and that's where it stays. So, for example, if you put that here because you want it there, that's
Yeah.
where it will always point to.
Okay.
So you can drag it right to the middle. There's it's magnet a little bit. It's interesting. It's not, no one else I don't think does that, but I like it.
Oh, and then also, I don't know which way your arrows go. Are you pointing to the claims or pointing to the source of the claim? Like, do I have that backwards?
Depends on what the predicate is. So backwards, because if saturated fats opposes, what does it oppose? Okay, well, it'd be the other way around then.
And then are
Saturated.
you having colors on the lines as well?
I had red, but I think you have to.
I
you have
guess this
different
one needs to be
colors.
purple, right? Or no, because that's a question. We almost need that to be not colored.
Why is the outline so colored?
Where do you change the border color? Oh,
I think that's a bug. I changed the border style, changed it back, and that updated the color.
oh,
So I imagine that's a bug.
okay. So yeah, that one opposes.
I think this is a bug too. See how the color is black? The word. Oh no, never mind. Yeah, no, the words on the other frame are the color of the line. Anyway, mine. Do you want me to bring over all of the supports for that saturated fats one?
I think we still need to look at each one individually. And also let me think for a second, because really, is that the level we want to start at? What else is there other than saturated fats? Because we don't necessarily want one for every fat type, but that is the main difference between keto diets and other diets, because they have healthy fats. We may need to change that term saturated fats, but I guess that's correct. Yeah. Okay. So yeah, so let's look at the ones. Yeah, these also might be kind of overlapping a bit. So one is replacement, one is so like these two of these here, these two in the middle here, that's unclear whether that they're overlapping or not. That makes sense.
One's reducing, one's replacing.
Yeah, but when they reduce the saturated fat, are they replacing? In the study, when they say reducing saturated fat, what are they replacing it with? Nothing? Like, are they doing a caloric deficit?
Good, that's a
Or are
good
they
call.
increasing it with? So I'd almost rather do this one because it's more specific, and then we could look at these studies or this study and see if they claim what it is, or if they're just telling people, hey, reduce your saturated fats, and some people are increasing carbs and some people are increasing healthy unsaturated fats. So we'd almost have to look at the study, see what it actually is. So I guess what I'm saying is this claim is more specific than that claim. They might overlap, they might not. So I don't know how you'd want to track these suggestions.
That is a very good question.
Is there just a comment thing on here? Or do you just do an
Not,
arrow? Note?
not that I'm aware of on the canvas. Maybe would that be better to do in
Is the note just a
the,
sticky?
yeah. Just a box that has aligned text, I think. I wonder if tracking those suggestions would be better in the graph itself on the daily notes page, saying,
Okay. Do you mind taking
well,
notes there?
what do you think about that? Is that,
I'm
no,
fine
or
as long
maybe
as you're comfortable with that it's tracked somewhere. I'm gonna completely forget unless I watch the video again.
that's a really good point. I wish it was both, but
Hmm.
that technology doesn't exist.
Not yet. This is interesting. Replacing excessive saturated fat with moderate amounts, particularly with specific replacements, tend to lower. Yeah, these are kind of rephrasing similar and slightly overlapping. And actually, these two are almost identical, right? Replacing SFAs with unsaturated fat, replacing saturated fats with polymono carbohydrates.
So it's like,
Oh, I'm sorry. These are probably both in specific. Maybe then the claim is reducing saturated fats, and we can use all these as evidence because replacement is a form
yeah,
of reduction. Um, if they're all showing that it's better to reduce it, then regardless of what they're replacing it with, then it doesn't. Then we don't have to make the distinction.
yeah.
If it's important, like some studies show, replacement is better than. Well, we may get into trouble later because we might find a study that shows replacing fat with carbs increases your weight, which increases your cardiovascular risk. Um,
That one says CHD. That's typo. Oh no, maybe it's not. Wait, hold on. Hold on. What was
I think is that a typo, or is there some people cardiovascular heart disease of just doing CHD instead of CVD?
yeah, I think there is a difference. I have other. Hold on. I remember there being different terms. I just don't remember what they were off the top of my head.
We have a.
Coronary heart disease.
That sounds right. That's usually CAD, coronary artery disease.
Maybe those are different. Often used interchangeably, but have slightly different meanings.
There's congenital heart defects. Hopefully it's not that
Coronary
one.
artery disease, coronary heart disease. These, the major.
Why they hide all this crap in PDFs.
So what you're pointing at there, that's CBD?
On my screen is supposed to be a comparison between the different terms.
What, but that big umbrella, the first bullet there that your mouse is on,
Oh,
I'm guessing that
yeah,
would be CBD,
cardiovascular disease, big umbrella.
general, CHD.
A type of cardiovascular. Yeah, so CVD would be the kind of broader term in general. Keep your diabetes under control. As opposed to eating fewer carbs and not having to take insulin. Yeah.
So I wonder if one of the reasons why I had these all separate is that one did specifically, it was almost like a piece of evidence, but forming it as a claim, but it was specific to CHD. So, but if we do group these all together, all the ones in that box, and just say replacing saturated fats, these will be subclaims of that. That would be basically the evidence for it.
Yeah.
That's that.
So even though in like reason score everything's a claim, there is in use kind of a thing where you're saying, oh, here's a broad description of what we're saying, and then when we're talking about evidence, it's like here's a link to it and here's the actual term and stuff like that. So yeah, if we're putting the kind of like name for it, the kind of like just claim without the evidence, then it'd probably be CVD. But when you're quoting that specific, the studies that they're quoting there are study or studies, then you would use their local terminology. Is it just saturated fats? I guess that's the question I was asking a few minutes ago. Is do we and then
Well, it seems to be, especially with these claims, they're all saying replacing saturated with polyunsaturated, monosaturated, and
yeah.
unsaturated.
And then we have the specific stuff about ApoB and LDL. Have you worked on that chart that compares the terms ApoD, ApoB, LDL, HDL?
Have something. The chart was lipoprotein density. So it doesn't have ApoB in it.
Okay. So I think we need, can you show me what you got?
Well, yeah, yep. And this
And I'm
could
sure
all be
it's-
very well wrong. Not wrong. ApoB might need to be in it, but there, okay.
Yep.
So here is what I got. I think it was from these pictures. Is where I got most of the terms, the reason why these terms are included versus others. But ApoB is here, saying they all carry ApoB. So, or types of ApoB apparently, maybe those are different as well. ApoB 48, ApoB, ApoC, ApoB 100.
Go down, let me see that chart.
Sorry.
So yeah, I mean, they're in this chart, they're explicitly saying that they're atherogenic. I mean, they generate atherosclerosis. So they're making the claim that they're causal. They seem to separate them visually, like there's an actual separation, but I wonder if they're.
What do you mean there's an actual separation?
I mean, like the body doesn't know the difference chemically. There's not a. I would be surprised
Oh, I see.
if there's an actual chemical difference between the LDLs and the HDLs. It's
It's
yeah,
just size
yeah.
or density.
So
Interesting. Yeah,
that's kind of like,
a little bit misleading.
yeah.
Actually, even when
I mean, really, this should be an area diagram.
even the way I think Feldman was talking about it, or was it the other guy, the first
Although
doctor?
yeah, I mean, when they're using the terms, it almost feels that way. And that's actually
That
one of the problems with, like, using language.
I'm pretty sure they even said like VLDL becomes LDL or the other way around.
Yeah, yeah. So
And it's like,
yeah,
well,
as it fills up, it gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and then it crosses
but,
the
but
arbitrary threshold.
yeah, but if it's just crossing the arbitrary threshold, the word becomes feels very wrong. Like it's not actually changing. It's just an attribute of it. It's changed.
Well, I mean,
That's
that's getting
interesting.
into one of my biggest pet peeves these days. Like, people say socialism is, and I'm like, no, millions of people use that word billions of different ways. There is no is.
Yeah,
A
yeah.
definition of word is almost never is. You're using it that way. Someone else is using it that way. It's not, there's very few words that have a singular definition.
Yeah,
So,
that's true. I think we got to this point because we were wondering where does ApoB fit here? Because we were looking at these two. Or this one, sorry. So
yeah.
should ApoB be somewhere more up here? Or is it just saturated fats? Or maybe
Well,
that's the go ahead.
yeah, I think it's okay to have it below. The
Okay.
bigger question is, one claim says LDL, one claim says ApoB. I think those are overlapping because before they knew, like, the terminology has changed and different fads on which one to complain about. So older studies, they don't have ApoB on them at all. But when they say LDL causes this, we now know that the part of the LDL that was causing it was ApoB. I mean, I don't know if that's true or not, but that may be true. Uh, maybe we should just say, because I think the top claim here needs to be a broader term. Maybe saturated fat raises. I mean, well, I was going to say atherogenic, but that's also, we'd have to put a claim later on saying there's no such thing as atherogenic. And so that gets confusing. Saturated fat raises, because I'm wondering if we should use an even more generic term like lipoproteins that are a risk factor.
Well, that's I think the way I see it, that's a claim from your side perspective that goes against someone who would make a claim just saying LDLs. I think that's good to highlight specifically rather than abstracting it away into the claim. SFAs increase that specific type. Does that make sense? Because I think, like, let's say drawing a blank on his name. The first interviewer, that doctor said SFAs increase LDL. Isn't that worth having on its own? And then
Well,
breaking it down as an opposing party, saying, well, actually, I think that's worth highlighting, because I would have had no idea. Well, I didn't have any idea of most of these things, but I feel like that's a specific one that most people wouldn't have an idea. I think that's what we do down here.
Well, so yeah, I think we'll eventually get down to that, but I think it's a weakening of it's kind of a straw manning their claim, because if you say, oh, it doesn't raise LDL, he would probably say, oh, I meant ApoB. You know what I'm saying? For him, the important thing wasn't that this specific word, these specific LDL particles. His point was it increases the risk factor for heart disease. Which actually particle it is, what part of the LDL, what part of the ApoB is not important to his claim. It could be nitpicking for us to say, oh, you said LDL, but you didn't say VLDL, so that's wrong. But I mean, we do need to get down to that level, because at some point they are saying that guy says LDL. We might need to put it in there, but he might be saying LDL is increased, and we may be able to show, hey, LDL is, but the bad part's the ApoB, and it increases the LDL that's not ApoB. So in that case, we would put it in there. But above all of that, there would need to be just a generic claim that's really hard to fight that says it increases bad LDL. Right. So that's the stronger one, because anytime you get more specific, people can attack it based on the specific terminology. But the main point is it's increasing the the cholesterol risk factor, whether that's actually LDL, ApoB, and then later on we can get into the details to say it doesn't, because it raises this one that's safe and this one that's not. Unless it becomes really clear. It's just you want to get away from all these kind of like arguing over the terminology. But I don't know for a fact that I actually agree with that. Yeah, I'm just kind of throwing it out.
Yeah, it's hard for me to decide on that. I think I see what you're saying, but the mental model in my head goes from like the first claim is saturated fats, increase heart disease. And then the second level of that would be, okay, well, let's break that down. Why does that happen? And it's like, okay, it increases LDL, increases ApoB, increases.
Well, but once again, LDL has ApoB on it.
But so does all the other ones. According to this, it says carrying ApoB, carrying ApoB, carrying ApoB. It's not, but LDL is the bad one, apparently, and HDL isn't so bad. But ILDL, VLDL.
Yeah, I guess what I'm saying is that we don't want to ding him as that claim being wrong just because he used the wrong terminology. That may have been right 5 years ago or whatever. You know what I'm saying? If he said LDL, but it's really VLDL, that's not, the important thing is not the exact terminology. The important thing is, does it increase? It's weaker to be more specific in a lot of cases. And I'm not saying we don't have it, but there should be kind of like a parent claim, because I don't want to have in there, oh, it's ApoB, and then we show, oh, it doesn't increase ApoB, but there is a one. You know what I'm saying? We got to make sure we cover all the possible dangerous lipoproteins. And so having a claim that just kind of bundles all that together. Like if he said VLDL, but it's really only the VLDL, having that quote that says LDL is a straw man of his argument, because that wasn't his intent. Even though that's what he said.
I'd have to go back and see the context. I can't remember exactly how.
But you know what I'm saying? That if it's like, if science comes out later, it's like I guess the thing is, if it's still dangerous and it's just not the exact section of the LDL that he was talking about, or his term was too vague or too specific, then we don't want to include that weak claim unless a
But
lot of people are making it.
well,
If we can rephrase it towards identifiable but stronger claim, then we
so
want to have
there,
that one.
I think there's two things going on in my head. One is you mentioned having kind of like a timeline, like this is how things were and this is how people perceived them, and that's very informative. And that would be part of the timeline, in my mind, of keeping the original claim and seeing how it changed and evolved. The
You mean in
second,
the video itself, or in
well,
the
if it's in the video, it doesn't have to be in the data somehow. I don't know how, but somehow.
well, yeah, maybe not. I guess I'm also thinking we want to figure out what what the final debate is, and then I would go back and fill in the past stuff if it's useful in the video.
And the other thing that comes to my head, and maybe it's hypothetical, because I don't know exactly what. Instead of saying this doctor, I'm gonna get his name again. Hold on. Carvalho. Carvalho.
Well, that's why you can't remember. You can't pronounce it.
Can't pronounce it. Is it Mike? I think it's Mike. Gill. Dr. Gill.
Yeah.
If Dr. Gill said LDL, and we're just assuming he means the bad LDL, I feel like we can't make that claim. I feel like that's jumping too far. Maybe in the context, if I go back and look at it, it's not. But it almost seems like, well, if someone like Dave Feldman comes along and says, actually, LDL isn't the problem. It's only a problem if X and Y are also there.
Right.
And
But
so if we say bad LDL, I don't know.
But
If
I mean,
there
does it
is-
matter to the argument if he
I think
let's
it-
say he just said the wrong word. Let's say he said LDL, but he meant in another interviews he said VLDL. Does it matter?
Oh,
the
sure. If
point-
it's
the-
only one little slip, that I agree with you.
well, but it's the same concept as if someone makes a claim 10 years ago and says VLDL and now it's LDL, the point that they were making, like they were using very specific terminology, but their point was that it increases bad LDL. They just used a specific term that ended up being wrong. They're not wrong. You know what I'm saying? Their intent, people rarely say exactly what their intent is. And his intent was, it's bad to do this because it increases your risk. And his example was that, but his original point wasn't wrong. So rephrasing it to where it would be, if he was rephrasing it today with more knowledge and during this, if he would rephrase it another way to get his point across, then we should use that rephrasing. Or I guess what we don't want to do is to have it to where we put LDL in there and it's dismissed. And then there's one that says ApoB, and then that's true. I mean, what's the value of having the LDL in there? It's just a weak argument.
If it's the case that someone interested in this subject is listening to Dr. Gill and hears X causes a rise in LDL, LDL is correlated with heart disease, increased risk in heart disease. They're like, okay, I believe you, that I should. Then they go away with that knowledge thinking this is true. This is just de facto true. But it's actually the case, like Feldman is going into, like that it's not specifically LDL, it's more specific than that. It's the type of LDL and why you get it and based on other factors. I feel like overcorrecting the original claim by Dr. Gill, at what point do we stop? What if another thing comes out and further down the line, oh, but he actually meant this specific thing? At what point is it just not true what he said?
Well,
or not true if you don't be more specific?
I guess the point is that we're not debunking Dr. Gill. We're not quoting him. We're saying what are the best claims and the most expressive claims that have ever been spoken about this issue? And how can we strengthen them? So these are claims that haven't even been spoken yet. So the question is, what's the best phrasing of that claim? Now, it may be important to use the word LDL somewhere in there. So someone's searching on LDL, it would pop up. But having extra claims in there where people just, are outdated and aren't useful, and that's why I say the stronger claims, but they still have to be recognizable. There might be some times that, maybe we'll look at it and we'll say, oh, we do need to have a specific claim that says LDL and have it dismissed. Because when someone's looking at these other claims, if they see ApoB, they won't recognize that's LDL. But also we could reduce the number of claims and make it easier to read if we say ApoB, a subsection of LDL, and then they would find that when they're searching. So it's more like we rewrite the claims and that's why I kind of keep saying as long as it's recognizable. Meaning that someone looking at that claim, like if that doctor or someone else would look at that claim and say, yeah, that's what I meant. And I think in this, well, we still would have to have LDL somewhere in there, and we may include it, I guess. But first I want to include the stronger claim and then add that in if we look at it and we go, oh, no one's going to recognize this side claim, this bad claim, in order to debunk it. But I don't know what that new claim actually says. But if the claim does say cholesterol, bad cholesterol, and then you put in parentheses ApoB, LDL, then that's everything in one claim rather than having a strong claim and a weak claim.
I'm looking for the transcript of this. There.
Well, what are you hoping to find in the transcript, though?
The context in which he said it. If we're getting specific to this one, but now I'm getting down a getting too detailed in this, and that's not what actually matters.
Yeah, because it's
I guess I'd have to just see it play out more to, I think, get a really deep understanding of kind of what you're saying.
And part of it is, yeah, we're what's in the debate is the perfect debater, and it isn't any specific one's claims. We're just being inspired by what they said. So
I think I generally follow with you. I just have reservations on it. But then seeing it play out would probably quell those.
Yeah.
So that's
we've actually gone a little long, I think, right?
We've gone to a lot of places, which is good.
Yeah.
Yeah, so if you have to jet, where
I don't necessarily have to, but like so my intuition is, although I could be wrong, is that we make one kind of really strong one for all of these because they're all kind of overlapping. Which may be bad LDL is is the cleanest way of grouping those. And then we could argue about which one is the accurate one.
These ones here, wouldn't these just be replaced with replacing saturated fat?
Well, yeah, I guess I was thinking the other two.
This one,
yeah, those two, which are a sub part of the replacing. Well, yeah, how do those relate? Replacing saturated fat. So one's are studies saying that it's right. So one is studies saying that we've done it and proven it, and the other one is saying here's that it's a risk factor. So yeah, so those 1, 2, 3, so those four at the top fall under reducing saturated fats, and then yeah, but those two on either side of that are the or is basically a risk factor. And we could loop that up and just say saturated fat increases risk factors, and replacing saturated fat reduces. Now, what's interesting, those studies that say reduces CVD, are they saying it reduces because they did a longitudinal study, or are they saying it reduces because it lowers the risk factors?
Good
So
question.
all four of those claims actually are not specific enough, and we need to look in to see why they're saying that. And it might all so they might be grouped under one thing saying risks, and then one of the alternates risk factors, and the other thing would say, risk factors
Some
are
of these are
not.
from the air table, so I don't have any source for them. Like this one specifically wasn't that. Maybe I just missed it. But
They should have had a source somewhere in there. Unless we were just taking the quotes and we hadn't looked up claims. Okay, that may be, because these are just quotes of people saying things. So in that case, I guess what we have to do is find the studies that we think they were referring to, and then look at those studies. So yeah, for each of these things, we need to say, when they say it increases the risk, are they looking at risk factors, or are they looking at longitude studies?
this one specifically does have a source. I think these both might as well. Let's just check. This one does. And this one does as well. It was just a quote. This one's a quote. So I might have to change this one to a quote instead of a, no. I don't know. How would you deal with that one? This is just something that Dr. Gill said.
Well, I think we're gonna end up not using that exactly. So Dr. Gill said it. Then we need to look and see, well, what studies do we think it was taken that he was looking at? If we think he was looking at one of the other studies that we do have quoted, then we just ignore it.
I don't know. Like, let's say you're watching a video and someone just says something like, here's just a, for example, like the context of this is, here's just a basic common sense fact is what he's saying. These three things are this. So I don't think we could find the specific studies he's referring to. Maybe we could find generic ones if you want, but
not the one that he's referring to, but we need to dig deeper and say, what do we think is the evidence that on why he thinks that that's true?
Yeah. Okay.
And that evidence may be in some of the other claims we already have. All we need to do is make sure that this claim, this quote, is reasonably represented in the final group of claims that we do. That makes sense.
Yep.
So go back to one of those studies and let's just see if the top level thing says increases. Like when it says increases and decreases, what are they talking about in that chart?
Question.
What they reported was 25% decrease. And decrease in what? It doesn't. Are those links? Over on the left side. Yeah, is that a link? Is that just linking to the quote?
This is linking to the transcript of Dr. Gill.
Yeah, so when he says decrease, we'd have to look at the context and see the decrease of what, if he says. Decrease in risk. So he may not be saying it. specifically. And this is just where people don't speak clearly. Okay, but up there he says now there's a famous 2015 analysis from Leah. That looks
I
like
think
where
it's the same one that he's talking about. These, I think, are from this.
right. But we'd have to look into say a decrease of what? Is it a decrease of the risk factors or is it the decrease of deaths in a longitudinal study? Incident cases of cardiovascular heart disease. So this is a longitudinal study. So this is saying this is actually cardiovascular events and percentage of people based on their diet. So that's actually a risk of it's so it's not a risk of like a lot of studies they're just doing it for a year and they're saying, hey, their LDL increased, so it increases heart disease.
Right.
But this one is actually looking at the number of cardiac. So I would say increase the chance of a cardiovascular event or something to that effect. So there's two claims in there then. One is saying it increases the risk factors and one is saying it increases the actual it's showed an increase in events. Does that make sense? Now, there's a bit of a weird overlap with that because if you're having events,
Is it because of
in those things where the events, the risk factors also increased probably. Could probably still keep them separate, even though there's an overlap. Of course, the problem with that study is that there were no low carbers in that study. They do have total carbohydrates, but like if you look at that chart right there, total carbohydrates. They're all about the same. I don't know what they mean by 51 carbohydrates.
percent of energy is from
Oh, God. See, look at that. Everyone's over 40% of their energy coming from carbohydrates. Right? So if you're getting into an argument that's saying so this study doesn't look at metabolic health at all. But and so you're saying so this study in essence and this argument is saying if you have bad metabolism, an increase in saturated fats will increase your heart disease. But the argument from the keto side is that if your metabolism is good, you would not show the same effect.
Yeah, no big deal.
But are there any studies that say that?
Yeah, that's interesting. So
the way I'd group this is I would say increase in saturated fat causes an increase in cardiovascular events, or there's a better term than that. And then the con against it would be that, and then we'd have the study as a separate claim, claiming to that, and then pointing to that claim or the other one, it would say that if you're metabolically healthy, that effect doesn't take effect. You know what I'm saying? So that would be the attack on this.
yeah, Now, I'd have to hear you say the pros and cons again to what's the parent of this claim and the pros and cons? Because in my frame of reference, I just have to translate it. Oh, it would be, this is the claim, and the evidence would be based
Well, I
on
would,
number of incidents of
no,
percent energy. Okay, go ahead.
yeah, I would genericize this claim up above it to say saturated, and we may already have this one, saturated fats increase the risk of cardiovascular events.
But isn't that what the same?
Well,
Or do you want to separate that?
it's a breakdown of that, because when someone says increase the risk of heart disease, they could be meaning the risk factors, or they could mean the actual percentage. Although I don't know, I guess I hadn't thought through it. There may not be a reason to put it. May be fine doing that.
I have to use the washroom real quick.
I
Do you
guess.
wanna-
Yeah, go ahead.
it gives you time to think specifically about this.
Yeah, plus
It
I
works.
did do it as well. So
Okay. So what did you figure?
so thinking you're probably right, at least at the beginning. So I explain how I think it might end up going. So you could put that study pointing directly to the saturated fats increased risk of cardiovascular heart disease. Although now we need to think of that wording. But I think we're going to find another study just like it. And we're going to want to group those together. And then we have these studies that say it increases the risk factors, but they're not actually talking about events.
Right.
And we probably want those separate.
Yeah.
So that's why I think we would then subdivide this one into studies that show risk factor increase and studies that show event increases. Although now, when I thought of that, then I thought, do we need the ones that talk about increasing risk factor if we just know those are going to be debunked immediately? I mean, it might be good to have for exhaustiveness, but if we have really strong evidence that's showing that that it actually increases events, then it doesn't matter whether the risk factor ones are true or not.
By risk factor ones, are you talking about it increases?
It increases LDL.
Yeah, some other thing. I think that's important because I imagine like the use case would be someone watching your video or coming to this data set with that in mind, saying, yeah, no, I believe this. So they should be able to look and find that specific piece, like increase in LDL increases risk.
Well,
and if we just completely remove it, I wonder if it'd be harder.
So yeah, I mean, there are two factors. One is when people to be able to find the claims. Well, see, I guess here's the problem. If we include that, I mean, technically that claim is true. It does increase the LDL, but the question is increased LDL a problem? So there's also a danger in having a claim that is true but is false because is true but not of value, and not having that be clear in the argument. I'm not saying to not include it now necessarily, but and these longitudinal studies and these risk factor studies actually are kind of interrelated. Because if you disprove the longitudinal studies, then the risk factor studies aren't important at all. I guess what I'd like to do is somehow keep track of the claims that we're debunking, just so people can find them, separate from the claims that are actually of value. Although, does that just come out in the scoring?
Yeah, I wouldn't be come up from looking at this. Like if you've debunked this, would you have
weight?
And you'd have some kind of opposes.
I guess the thing is, though, I want to make sure that we don't have just like it's not full of a whole bunch of debunking because it's slightly different terminology. So I'd almost like want to roll up several of those that are debunked that say like, so roll them up in LDL, VLDL, ApoB, right? If the net result is it doesn't matter whether it increases these because those aren't actually risk factors.
Right. If we can, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I see where you're going with that.
But you see the process of thinking through, do we need to include that or not? Even in this case, we said no. It's still important to rethink every claim in context multiple times to see. It's a puzzle that we're putting together. You ever see Calto on Star Trek? I think it's Calto.
It doesn't ring a bell, sorry.
They're like, they show them like laying down a little metal thing and then the whole thing changes shape. It's some sort of game to where when you make a move, the whole board changes.
Wow.
That's kind of what this is.
100%.
It's kind of complexity theory. And this is also one of the risks with you could see how much time we're spending on this. Now, hopefully we'll learn some kind of heuristics that'll speed it up in the future, but there's a good chance that the amount of work it takes is just.
Well, and I think that's a big reason why people believe what they believe, even if it's unwarranted, because you can't expect everyone to do this for every belief they have. It just can't. It's
Yeah.
impossible.
Although if we can get a score out of it, then that will make it easier for them to find where they disagree.
One thing I was going to mention, it kind of passed the context of what we were talking about, and I don't know if it adds any value, but I'm going to mention it anyway, is I always keep picturing this as this like knowledge graph ball, and that being the only way it can actually be represented. Because, like, for example, this claim we were talking about, can't zoom in more. Sure, it supports saturated fats increase. It like it showed, it absolutely did. But then just what I read, what Feldman's talking about, how well it matters what, like you were saying, it matters what your metabolism is like, because that doesn't apply to you. So you'd have an arrow like this going to it, which makes me represent it as a knowledge graph ball. But could we counter that? Would we counter that just by being more specific, or like?
Yeah,
don't
I
know.
think you do that by changing the wording of the claims, but there's a chance that it can't be represented in a hierarchy. The problem is then how do we do the math?
Yeah,
Because the math doesn't work. If you have loops,
yeah, I imagine.
and in the Canalca Debate Lab meetings, they were like, "Oh yeah, you can have loops," and I'm like, "You can write a program that will calculate a number, but the logic between whether you counted that loop the first time through or where you started or stopped will have different numbers, and there's no logical reason to choose one over the other. So you can make it deterministic, but you don't have a logical reason behind it. Although some other things in my design don't have logical reasons, so maybe that's not an issue. I think a lot of times in those cases, that claim will actually exist in two places in the
Okay.
math,
Yeah.
but be in one place kind of in the model. Like we'll know they're the same claim, but when you run the mathematical numbers, you actually have the numbers will be like they'll both be true, but their weight may be different.
Right. That kind of makes sense. I think
Yeah.
I can kind of picture that. Interesting.
So that's the way. And actually the reason score kind of data model allows for that. And actually that's where I was saying that you actually have two trees. And I guess the other one's not really a tree, it's a graph. But when you're running the score, yeah, the score is a separated tree on top. I think of it as on top of the other one. So you have the main graph, but when I'm doing the math, I may get two different scores for the same claim. Mind bending, isn't it?
Mind bending. On another side note, what I was working on today, and yesterday a little bit, that I think is going to apply to this in terms of just visually representing it on a canvas. I know that I guess that's not
Cool.
what we're doing, but is semantic zoom, apparently is what it's called. Semantic zoom and stretch text.
Okay.
And I've already seen examples of it on, like, someone has an article, and then what they do is you take each article and chunk it down into their subheadings, and they ran those subheadings through GPT as summarize this, and so you can just, like, I think even did Society Library do that too? I don't remember.
Well, so they did stretch text. Yeah.
Right, I remember
Which
the
is
stretch
similar to
text part.
semantic zoom, except the person's manually doing it on piece by piece. And semantic zoom is like, I think when you're zooming in and out, it'll shrink the text and grow it, or like
And
show fewer words to be specific.
yeah, and that's exactly what I want to do here. When I go back to, like, this should just say blood sugar and this should just say insulin. Like if I'm zoomed out to this level, as soon as I zoom in more, sure enough, it'll.
Yep. And I've thought about putting that into Reason Score. I never expanded the data model to handle the multiple levels. And yeah, now that we have ChatGPT or LLMs, it'd be easier to probably do an analysis. Although it wouldn't be that hard also to write a program that says, from this claim compared to all the other claims, either in its area or the whole board, what words make it unique?
But not just unique, it has to be words that make it relevant to the parent claim, let's say, or to the view you're in. You
Yeah,
just said that you said related or around.
yeah, I think uniqueness would end up covering that, but that's probably more of an assumption.
Could be right.
The examples I have when I think about it,
Work.
the word that I would choose happens to be, or the phrasing, if two have very similar phrase. The question is though, if you need to use a phrase, how far do you go? Yeah. I was thinking of some algorithms to do it, but now probably, using an LLM to do it would probably be just as good.
What I'm building is just, it's very simple article, and it's the UI or the UX, I guess, of being able, how the user actually changes it. And like zooming is one, and I haven't seen that in an article yet. I want to be able to read an article or a book by just zooming out, and I get the entire outline, and I zoom in, and then it gets more and more detailed.
Yeah.
And I want to do that for an article, and so that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to have like eventually like five different levels of zoom.
Yeah, that'd
And
be
then
awesome.
and then I want to apply that to a YouTube video, because we already have the breaking down YouTube video summaries. Do the same thing,
Mm-hmm.
and then apply that to a graph.
Yeah.
What I learned. Sorry, sidetrack.
No, that's cool. That's good to hear. Well, cool. I am running out of steam finally.
That was good. That was very good.
Yeah, so keep mulling on that. I was also thinking while we're on break that it might be worth organizing a section of this tree in like 2 or 3 different ways, like doing it the one where you have the middle kind of grouping claim, and doing it one without, and then being able to look at them side by side. Because everything I'm saying here is kind of like, I think it'll look better if we organize it this way, but I don't actually know. So it might be worth at some point in the future modeling in 2 different ways. Of course, I'm also thinking later on when we have 2 studies there, and right now we only have 1, so it'd be more obvious one way now, but later on there might be a need to add that extra structure level.
Yeah, kind of.
So I'm kind of thinking ahead, which isn't fair, but and could be premature optimization, right?
True.
If we never get a study, it's overly if we never get a second study, it's overly complex.
Yeah. In terms of leaving off right now, the idea was to group these 4 into one.
Yeah.
And I'm likely then going to put these 4 down below.
Well, okay, so what's dangerous is I don't know that for all 4 of those that they're all longitudinal studies. So you really need to group them by longitudinal studies and risk factor studies. And some of those you don't know. So you almost need an unknown box to hold them, and then split them up.
Yeah, because I know this one is neither of those actually as well. This is just a bold-faced claim. Yeah, out of nowhere.
Yeah, and so for those, we need to probably have a storage bank somewhere to look back later. Unless you know that claim, which I think we do, is covered in those other claims, then we could just take it out. But if we're not sure, then we put it somewhere and look back later and say, have we found some? So the thing is, either say that a better claim's already in there, or we need to go improve this claim to put it in. Does that make sense?
By improved, you mean finding evidence or evidence claims for this? Yeah.
Evidence that could potentially, answer that claim or support that claim.
Part of the way I think we can do it is because this is actually organized as a knowledge graph, like in the data structure, we can query it. We can just say all claims that have no support. I think that's a possibility for us to, rather than tagging it, we can just grab them all.
But for this specific claim, isn't it already kind of covered in the other claims that are right next to it?
Not specific with unsaturated fat. Those ones were.
Well,
but if you mono unsaturated.
Yeah.
There's mono
what's the other claim?
And poly. So is this just grouping both of these, or is there more?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
So it'd probably be okay at this point just to eliminate it.
We just double check with the GPT.
Yeah.
This is just
there might be a third type of unsaturated fat more than poly and mono. Well, no, mono's one, poly's many.
Yeah, no, that's it. So okay, this is This is this claim.
So I mean, if we wanted
Let's
to
just
store
we can
quotes
just
that were
delete this.
inspirations, that could be an inspiration to, along with the quote with the study, those could both be pointed to that claim in the system that said they were inspired off of these quotes.
Yeah, and this one is just from the Airtable. So actually, I might just delete this one because
Yeah.
we've replaced it. Okay.
It's pretty weak.
So that's cool. Look into it. I'm not deleting now. Just I'm not sure what else entails. If there's any stragglers
Yeah.
by directly deleting, but cool. Cool.
Cool. Well, thanks for the time and helping me go through this. I was hoping we'd have a little bit more structure here, but we made a lot of good work getting to it.
Mhm. We did.
And it might
We
look,
did.
by the time you organize it a little bit, we might have gotten there already, and I just can't see it.
Oh, I don't think, did we come to a conclusion on this one? Are we? I think we tangented off of it, didn't
Yeah, I don't know. What I'll do is I'll post this video. And you can scrub through at 2x speed and see if we missed anything.
That's good. Actually, I think I'll probably do that.
I gotta look at our first recording, see if we said anything useful. I don't think so. I think pretty
And
quickly I screwed up my video.
specifically, do you have an idea of what direction to go? That you
Oh,
would
so
like to
going,
go in
I
terms of
think,
next source or next anything?
no, I think we're kind of out of, I don't think mining other sources will get us much further. I'm almost thinking now we have the top level claims and we're searching for the best evidence
Okay.
to support those.
Yeah.
So let's head down that path. And if we get stuck, then we could go out and maybe we'll know better search terms to search for related claims. Maybe.
Cool. That is
Because I do think now that we rephrase that top statement now, a lot of the claims just don't apply. So
yeah, that makes
probably
sense.
purely research now.
I'm gonna see here too, if in my meeting notes, I think I might have had a couple other questions for you.
Okay.
I think we basically covered it. It was at this point, what is your idea of how the video will go? I think I kind of got a good idea of what you're thinking, unless there's something else you want to add to what was said.
The only thing that just came up recently, like, so before I was thinking of a news reporter saying, oh, they found out this, then someone said this, and just kind of going through the debate. But now I'm thinking, because one of the ways to use reason score is in a kind of a semi-live debate where two teams are doing researching and arguing. Now I'm thinking I just simulate that and I say, well, this is obviously a simulation. This isn't a real debate. And actually, if I'm playing all the characters, then it'd be even more obvious. So I'd be like, I'd play, have slightly different clothes or stuff like that. And I'd say,
yeah.
okay, so what's your move? So our move is going to be on claim number 5. We're going to say this, 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 and this, and this. And then you'll see it like talking back to another copy of me who's doing the research. What are you doing? And then even have the asides to where say, yeah, when we came to that, I was, when they said that, I was just shocked. And we went scrambling back to the internet to figure out what the heck they meant by that claim. And so do kind of a Survivor sort of thing where they have the asides and they have the moves and stuff like that.
Yeah, that's interesting.
That might even be more fun.
That would add to the value of the entertainment value in the
It might be interesting even if someone or even most of the people on the team aren't familiar with the rules, and then have the ref, which would be another character I play, be kind of explaining to them, okay, that move doesn't actually take a move because you're strengthening the other team's claim. Right. So we're not going to take a move there. Go ahead, take another move. And so do it like this is the first event, even though it's a fictional version, and then people are kind of learning about it. So that's what I'm thinking. Of course, that like doubles or triples the amount of time because I'm playing
Yeah,
multiple characters.
and then video editing and all that stuff.
Yeah. So we'll see if I actually do it.
Maybe not for the first video, maybe for the third video as we.
Yeah. So the first one might be, okay, here's the tree. I'm going to talk it through. And it may
Yeah,
just be a call to, hey, call us out on our shit.
yeah.
What are we missing?
I
In
really
this
liked
call?
your idea of doing a quick first video. I, we should explore that. But I think for that to be effective, we'd probably already need a following or being able to have a reach in whatever.
Yeah. The question is, could I get it out to enough people that it would be
Yeah,
useful? I don't know.
yeah.
It's interesting because if I actually call out the names of the people doing it and it's done very like if I'm taking their arguments and strengthening them
Mhm.
and then saying this is as far as I got, I'm not saying it's true or false. What I have wrong, we might get some responses.
That's a really good point. I
But
it's likely worth the time it takes to make a small video to put it
try.
out. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, that's good
Cool,
to know.
man. Well, I'll let you know when I post this. I'll post it live, but no one's watching my YouTube channel, so it won't matter. And then
I
I'll
had
let you know.
I had one last one.
Oh,
It says
sure.
maybe we should have a common theory of the claim high LDL causes LDL to crash into the artery wall and oxidize, and somewhere at a high level and address it. Same with the claim LDL-C causes heart disease is common knowledge, LDL cholesterol. So yeah, I think that was in the series where she said this is just generally common sense. High LDL causes LDL to crash into the artery wall and oxidize,
Yeah,
which
so it's
causes heart disease.
what I don't know now that we've kind of looked at where we are. Right now we're saying, okay, there's longitudinal studies that are showing a correlation. So my gut reaction is later on we're going to prove those false, and then we're not going to prove them false. I think we're going to show that there wasn't enough keto people in those studies to actually provide evidence to say that keto is unsafe. But we also don't have any studies that say keto is safe. So then we'll probably get into an argument of there's no actual evidence. And unfortunately, if it's that way, the winner technically would be the correlation is there. If you have no reason to show the correlation is false, and then the safest way is to assume it's correct until you know
Yeah,
otherwise, right? You don't
yeah.
gamble without, you have that's weak evidence, but it's stronger than the alternative. And then the argument would be, okay, the studies show there's a correlation. We can't prove causation. Now we're going to talk about, is there a metabolic path, not a metabolic, I can't remember what a causal, if there's a theory of why it would be. And that's where we get into those 5 things on is correlation causality, and one of those is there an expected path of it being causal. And then we'll be able to argue about the causality. But first we need to see, because in theory, if we found a whole bunch of studies that shows, oh, we did measure people's carbohydrates, and these people that were in ketosis still had a higher chance of heart disease, then we don't need to do that.
Right, that makes sense.
But yeah, but definitely keep those to make sure that we address it if necessary, or we dismiss them. You might need somewhere a flag on all this stuff that says we've reviewed it. You know what I'm thinking? Like that one we've dismissed. I kind of want to say I want a way to query everything and say
Oh,
these
so
things.
instead of deleting it, like, because of the one I'm going to delete, is that the one you're referencing?
Well, maybe that one's worth deleting because it's so weak. But there's some
Okay.
other things. It's like we decided not to include this, but we may run across it again and accidentally
Yeah,
reconsider it.
yeah,
Or if it's like it's included, but it's just reworded. I guess if you're pointing it to its rewording in the graph somewhere, then we do have it.
Yeah, that, the pointing would be fine if we, for the rewording, but we've looked at it and decided X to it. I wonder if it needs to be in a bucket, just like those other ones were at the top corner. And it's just another bucket saying, here's ones that aren't staged to maybe go in, they are have been looked at, but they're not. So that on the canvas, you can actually just at a glance see it too.
Yeah. Yeah. So
Because if
think
it's
about,
just, if it's buried in the data, you just won't see it.
yeah, just how you want to track all these things. It's like, well, it may be useful in the future. We want to make sure we look at all of those before we publish, so we didn't miss anything.
Yeah. Status per claim, quote. Status per node, basically.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. Okay, that is me. Thank you.
Cool. Right.
Until next time.
Yeah. Talk to you later.